Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper on Sunday, March 29th, 2020. We are still hunkered down, keeping our social distances.
Right, except from each other. Right? Because we're pretty close here. Huddled around the microphone.
But we've been getting outside.
Yeah.
Outside in the fresh air.
Right, in Pennsylvania. There are wide open spaces, wonderful trails. And
that really helps to revive us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel poorly for people who don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, because you need the change of scene.
Yeah.
You need the exercise. And because we are working off the Quarantine 15. Have you heard about this?
No.
Quarantine 15, like the freshman 15?
Oh, no, I don't think we're gaining any weight. We're definitely not.
Well, we could be.
No, but
we're eating awfully well.
Yeah, but it also gives you a sense of normalcy. I mean, when you walk around outside and it's just you and the Delaware River, it doesn't look too alarming out there.
Right.
It's something we're used to seeing. So, but at the same time, when we're inside, we don't have the opportunity that we've had in the past to go to plays, especially in New York.
Or movies.
Or movies locally. So we're, looking at that television set and seeing what we can get in terms of bringing up movies and the like. And we've had some success with that. So we thought we'd talk about what we've been watching at least for the past week. Because, every night you got to think about what you're going to watch. And I think there are three things that we thought were worth mentioning. And the first was Emma. So,
Emma.
Lest anyone think that people here don't put their money in their hand in their pocket once in a while to pay big bucks. We actually forked over the $20 to see a first-run movie because Emma would still be in the movies otherwise. And that gave us a chance to see Emma, which was in broad release before all the movie theaters were closed. And it was a movie we intended to see. And
so Emma,
of course, is the Jane Austen book.
Jane Austen's version of Clueless.
Yeah, Jane
right?
Austen. You might want to clarify
as I understand that.
Yes, Clueless being a take on Emma. Sometimes, do people even remember Clueless? By now, that's not a new movie.
Yeah, if you say it to the kids, they all know what Clueless is.
So that was a take on Emma.
And so that's how I explained it.
And there's another version of Emma that was done with Gwyneth Paltrow.
Many versions, like a billion versions.
There are a billion versions of Emma. So what do you think of this one?
I thought it was fine. I thought it was cute.
I thought it was better than cute. I thought it was quite good.
Yeah.
And it had a real... it looked great. It looked great. It was very meticulously shot. It was wonderfully colorful. I thought the woman who played Emma, the young woman, Anna Taylor-Joy, was...
delicious.
Charismatic is the word I would use. You can use delicious if you like.
Okay.
And just to give you some names, Johnny Flynn, who apparently is sort of a rock singer that was drafted to do this movie, was quite good as her counterpart. It's directed by Autumn de Wilde. It has Bill Nighy in it, who's always kind of amusing. It has Miranda Hart, who's the very tall woman from Come the Midwife. So there are some familiar faces. But I liked it quite a bit. I mean, I haven't seen all the Emmas. I haven't read any Jane Austen. And, it's not Wittgenstein, right? It's domestic in a sense. But it was quite
it's a great story about a young woman, who kind of, like we all do when we're young, think we know everything.
Yeah.
And, it just shows her, coming to grips with
that was the thing.
Reality.
And I liked that,
that
there was an arc to the character.
Yes.
It wasn't like you just had someone, that's the way she is, and now here's someone else, that's the way she is.
Isn't this funny? And then she gets married. No, it's, there's a...
Yeah, in a subtle way, she comes to grip with thing, and the story turns on that.
development of her character.
Right, and that actually what makes the movie resonate.
That and great costumes.
Is it?
Yeah.
She had great hats.
Her dresses...
I did notice her hats.
Yeah, and her dresses are fabulous.
Yeah.
Bill Nighy's outfits are fabulous.
Well, Bill Nighy's... I remember his pajamas were pretty outstanding.
Yeah, so it's... great fun visually.
So I would recommend it. I think it's worth the $20. Figure for two people, you're amortizing it. It's just like a movie ticket.
But I have a feeling if people wait 2 weeks, it'll be...
Oh, yeah. Look, you're probably right. It probably just cost a few dollars, but that's not the point. The point is, I think Emma's worth seeing. We certainly enjoyed seeing it. So that was the number one that we saw. Then we saw last night a movie that was released in 2007 called The Darjeeling Limited. Sorry. And and that is a Wes Anderson movie.
Boy, was it ever.
Yeah, a Wes Anderson movie. So it's
may
odd.
have had an arc.
It's off track.
I couldn't find it.
Right. It's so this stars Owen Wilson, Adrian Brody, and Jason Schwartzman as three brothers, and they're all kind of idiosyncratic performers. Owen Wilson probably most closely identified in that group with Wes Anderson. It was partially written by Jason Schwartzman, and we've seen in other things. And you were commenting today about what an interesting face Adrian Brody has.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they were an odd trio in terms of brothers. Yeah. And it's on a journey that ultimately culminates in their meeting up with their mother, played by Angelica Houston, who, according to some people's analysis of the movie, that is what ties the movie together. I think it's a little short of that, honestly. I mean, it is not what you would call a straight line conventional narrative.
Right.
And I mean, I picked up a Roger Ebert review of the movie, which he did in 2007 when Roger Ebert was still with us. And what he said, and I think this kind of resonates, he says, quote, "The movie meanders so persuasively, it gets us meandering right along." And maybe that's a little bit of positive, but it's a meandering film and it's a pleasant place to be.
I think you just let go of your, demands in terms of plot development and enjoy.
Right.
And you were saying also that you enjoyed the, the culture, immersing yourself into another world, right. Both Wes Anderson's world and the world of India. That's right. And the colors and the foods, etc.
Good way to put it. And that also sort of dovetails with what's going on with the characters. And again, it's not a conventional narrative, but you have these three brothers who have sort of unusual, maybe you might call it troubled relationship and troubled relationships with others and their mother. And what makes the movie, what animates the movie is throwing them into this foreign culture, which is completely different. Yeah. That forces them, as well as us, to just think about things just a little bit differently. Right. And it puts things in an entirely different context, and it makes the movie, I think, worth watching.
It's worth watching. And it's also very accessible in the sense that it's not heavy-handed.
No.
In terms of introducing you to another culture. It's light.
Right.
It's quirky. And you're into that. You're into their lives before you even know it.
But you have to suspend your expectations with respect to conventional narrative because you're not going to quite get that.
Right.
Right. And did I interrupt you? You were about to say something else?
No, but I was wondering, do you happen to know when that movie was made?
Oh, sure. 2007.
Oh, okay.
So Wes Anderson has released since then.
I almost thought it was older than that, but
no.
Okay, so
that's some time ago.
13 years old.
13 years old, and Roger Ebert thought it was Wes Anderson's best movie to that time, and I think he's made movies since then. So there's an arc for Wes Anderson. And the third movie is, to my mind, the standout. The movie called Breaking Away, which was made in 1979. Which is about 4 youths in Indiana, in Bloomington, Indiana, near the campus of Indiana University. And they're coming of age, if you will, which, of course, doesn't do the movie justice. And it does sort of revolve around the main character's infatuation with Italian cycling and culminates in a momentous bicycle race, which is the what's called the Little 500, which is a race that's run every year on a track in Indianapolis, and it's a great movie. I mean, what do you think of it?
Well, of course, it came about because you've been seeing all these lists. There are lists everywhere about what to watch since we're all hunkered down and watching stuff on the smaller screen. And you were looking at, I guess, lists of great sports movies,
right? And
I guess mostly it wasn't there.
Right.
And you were thinking, why aren't people listing Breaking Away? Well, it is a great movie. And it's about cycling to some extent.
Only to
some extent. But it's
extent.
also about growing up. It's about family relationships. The main character's relationship with his dad, the portrayal of the dad, are just fantastic.
Right.
And the look of the movie is so 70s.
But it doesn't take away from the movie in any way.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. If anything, it just kind of enhances it, and it's really, it really was enjoyable in many ways. I mean, it does have, some. It has some great race scenes.
Well, you know what's funny about that? Because you said to me, there's one scene, and he has some training scenes, and there's one in particular where he's following some truck, and and you say to yourself, "Gee, it's almost scary." And when we were watching it with Granger and Nico, during some other scene, they said, "Oh, he's going to have an accident," and it was pointed out, and I'll get to the Ebert review in just a second. One thing he points out is that the director Peter Yates directed action movies. He directed Bullet with Steve McQueen, and he says he is using his experience in action movies, and he's trying to get you to be worried about the character. Mm-hmm. But it's not that kind of movie. It's a better movie than that. Yeah. It's not about an accident happening. Just to continue with Ebert, consistent with what you were saying, this is what Ebert said about the movie in 1979. He said, breaking away. He said two things. First of all, your point about the family dynamic. He made the point, he said, you know something? Here's a family that gets along. You never see that in a movie. You never see it in a film.
They're not always entirely happy with each other.
No, but they don't hate each other.
But they get along.
They get along with their kids. He said, Breaking Away is a wonderfully sunny, funny, goofy, intelligent movie that makes you feel about as good as any movie in a long time. It is, in fact, a treasure.
Yeah.
And I was saying to a friend of mine, I said, talk about movies about youth in Indiana. This is a movie that's better than Hoosiers. And of course, he hadn't seen it. He said, that seems impossible. Well, it's possible. Well, and I should, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we should mention who's in it. I should say it's written by Steve Teich, and I only mentioned that because it got the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. Mm-hmm. And it stars Dennis Christopher as the main character. All these young people had careers. Daniel Stern, Jackie Earle Haley, and of course Dennis Quaid. And the father is Paul Dooley, and the mother's Barbara Barry.
So they were just great together. And I should mention that this is a great family movie.
Yeah.
Not for little kids.
Well, I was going to ask you, what's the cutoff? What's the cutoff?
Oh, I would say, because it's about high school students, I would aim for high school and up.
I'd say 14. 14?
It's not because there's not any thing you don't want little kids to see. They just won't get it.
Right.
It just won't resonate.
Yeah, I think 14.
But for anybody who's ever had a kid or was a high school kid going into college, it's a great thing to watch. So I too recommend it.
Yeah. I do think it is a great family movie. But I think it's just a great movie. So in any event, so that's our recommendations and evaluations in terms of things we've seen on the screen. I mean, we haven't been able to get to the theater. There was a journal article this week about all the things that are being affected in a profound way. Not surprisingly, one of the things they point out are theaters. They write, as you might expect, about prominent theaters such as the Metropolitan Opera. Metropolitan Opera is losing $1 zillion. The Metropolitan Opera has laid off everybody. All the people laid off are not complaining. Oddly, they're saying we understand the situation is an extreme one. And the journal observes, as they must, that this is also like a ton of bricks upon all the smaller theaters. And it is. And the Theaterama associated with Classic Stage has to deal with it too. But you had an article that sort of looked at theaters a little bit differently. Yeah.
Well, we are reeling from all these businesses that are being so heavily affected by the necessities of dealing with the virus. But there was an article in the arts section by Michael Kimmelman of the New York Times last week, giving us kind of a theater tour. So there's all this virtual stuff going on, right? So you can, watch virtual shows on TV. You can take virtual tours through museums. And this is the Times trying to give you somewhat of a tour of the theaters of Broadway, which are now all closed down, with an award-winning architect and designer, David Rockwell. And
Yeah.
he designed a lot of stuff that we're familiar with.
Right.
Do you realize that?
Yeah, no, I read the article. I had to read it twice because there's the idea that he's designing productions and he's an architect, so he's sort of working on renovations of theaters. They're two different kinds of things.
Right. He does set designs.
Yeah.
He does theater design. He does restaurant design.
Yeah, they almost make it sound like it goes together.
He's gotten a Tony for She Loves Me.
Really?
Which we saw that production.
Which I remember they called it a jewel box.
Yeah, and I mean, that was an important part of that
yes.
production. But he designed Tootsie, Harvey, Hairspray, zillions.
Right.
Okay. But he's also gotten a Peter Beard Award.
Right, I saw that. I didn't understand that.
Or James Beard.
James Beard.
Sorry.
Restaurant.
James Beard Award for recognition for restaurant design.
I don't know what it's
like a big tribute.
Yes.
So he's quite knowledgeable. The fun thing about him is his background.
Yeah.
Okay, how did he get interested in theater design? Probably stems from his mother, who was a performer, and when he was a little kid, his father passed away. And they were in Chicago. They moved to Deal, New Jersey.
Oh,
now,
yeah,
you know Deal.
Yeah.
Because we ride through it on one of our
It's sort of an
spring bike
affluent
rides.
Jewish community.
By the shore.
Right.
There's the beach
Yeah.
and these enormous, beach houses,
Right.
so to speak. They're really palaces and not much else. Apparently, his mom founded a community theater
Right.
when they lived there. And he's a little bit younger than we are, I think. And that's how he got, kind of into the theater world a little bit. Mm-hmm. And anyway, it never rubs off. He also talks about going to his first Broadway show when they were living in Deal, I guess, going to Fiddler on the Roof. And going to a restaurant, going to Schraff's, and just the whole festivity of the activity, going out to eat, the people, the laughter, the clinking of the glassware,
glasses,
and then
the
amazing sort of group experience of being in the audience of a show.
He says he felt he was part of something. Even in Schraff's, he felt he was part of something.
Right. The whole thing, the whole going out and going to the theater, etc. So he sounds like a fun guy to take the tour. I won't try to describe everything he says about these various theaters. They resonate with him, to some extent on a design level.
Right.
And what is the architect trying to do? And, he's kind of looking and noticing little details about the original facades or the original interiors that resonate with him. So that was kind of a fun article. Is there anything else?
No, I think you got it. I mean, it's almost hard without pictures. And even his observations didn't match up with the pictures in the Times entirely. So
no,
you couldn't really get it.
And
he was talking about the interiors quite a bit.
Yes, he did. He also mentioned the Belasco. Now you've heard of the Belasco. Did you realize it opened in 1907 and it was designed for David Belasco, who put a 10-bedroom duplex apartment
in the top.
On the top.
Right.
So it's a nice little insider's view, and he does kind of make that point that all these places go through a lot of change. Nothing's permanent, as we're learning now, for real. And all these aspects of the theater, the people, the performers, the designers, they're all intertwined. So that was a fun little virtual tour. And then I want to talk a little bit of art. Okay, so I have to admit that during this sequestering, I have been working like a dog. Because just translating all my face-to-face classes into online classes and trying to make them engaging and interesting, even though computer isn't my finest medium, has been consuming me. So it's fun to see some articles that relate in terms of art. And there's a very fun article in the Weekend Arts by Jason Farago in the New York Times entitled Saint Epidemic. And it's about a painting by Anthony van Dyck, Flemish painter, from the 17th century. And it's in the Met exhibition celebrating their 150th anniversary, okay? Which it's an exhibition that nobody's getting to see because, of course, the Met is closed. But Farrago got to see it. And this painting, which is Saint Rosalie interceding for the plague-stricken Palermo, was painted in 1624 by a 25-year-old Anthony van Dyck. It was one of the first acquisitions of the Met.
Right, and you said that was in the 19th century, late 1800s.
Yeah, it was like 1870. Yeah. So it's notable for that. Yeah. Of course, when they acquired it, they thought it was mistakenly entitled something like Virgin, the Assumption of the Virgin, which refers to the Virgin Mary being lifted up into heaven, because it's a depiction of a beautiful woman floating about in the sky, surrounded by Pooty, little baby angel types, heading up into the sky. I mean, if you look at it closely, you say, hey, really doesn't look like the Virgin Mary and doesn't have any of her attributes. Well, Saint Rosalie, I should say, was actually, here's the story. It's a little bit of a complicated story. Let me try to cut it down. Anthony Van Dyck. Van Dyck was in Sicily to do a painting of the island's Spanish viceroy. Okay? Now, he finishes the painting. This is 1624, but he can't get out of town because the plague has struck and they're in quarantine. The port is shut down. So meanwhile, as this whole plague thing is going on, and to put it in perspective, on May 7th, 1624, Palermo reports the first cases of a plague that will soon kill more than 10,000, some 10% of the city's population. They have the whole deal. They're going through what we're going through, state of emergency, etc. So there was a discovery of some bones on the island, which are declared to be those of the Saint Rosalie, and people prayed to them, and it's kind of when those bones are discovered. Long story short, the people feel that Saint Rosalie helped
help protect them.
Help protect them.
So he's
slow down that plague.
So that's what he's going to paint.
So he's been asked to paint, do this painting, and he does. He has to invent the iconography, that is, the attributes. He puts some roses in it because Saint Rosalie, get it? But other than that, he's kind of figuring out it out on his own. So that's wow. Van Dyck, good on you for making the most of your quarantine.
Yeah, all right.
Better than we're doing. Are you getting tired of hearing me? Do you want to hear about
no,
Holbein?
I have actually, no, I don't want to hear about Holbein yet.
Okay, all right.
We have a couple of obituaries. Actually, we have a bunch of obituaries. I'm going to do them two at a time, but we're going to race through them because we got a lot to cover here. But the most prominent figure, at least one that we actually have some connection to, Terrence McNally passed away. And Terrence McNally won 4 Tonys. And the 4 Tonys, interestingly, are 2 of them were for straight plays, non-musicals: Love, Valor, Compassion, and Masterclass, in which it's about Maria Callas, the opera singer, but it's a regular play. And also, he wrote books for musicals. He got a Tony for Kiss of the Spider Woman and for Ragtime. And he was prolific. I mean, he wrote 36 plays. He wrote the books for 10 musicals. He wrote the librettos for 4 operas. He wrote screenplays for film. And we got a chance to see him in what I'll call conversation at, I guess that was 54 Below.
Yes.
In a fundraiser for Classic Stage in which John Doyle had a conversation with
and that
him.
was a great conversation.
Yeah, he was, look, I'm not going to add to
He was charming and delightful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He was an incredibly engaging guy. He had an interesting life story. Came from Corpus Christi, Texas. I mean, he's really born in Florida. But
the best story
was
coming as a freshman to Columbia.
Yeah, Columbia
University, and he immediately runs down to try to see My Fair Lady. Yeah. And, he's just a young guy. Yeah. And the box office people just stare at him and say, this is sold out for months, kid. And he goes on to see... Damn
Yankees.
And
with Gwen Verdon, which is pretty damn
fun
good.
Show.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was fun to hear him reminisce.
But also, he's talking about growing up as a young gay man in Corpus Christi where they weren't having it. And he goes to New York and his whole life opens up. And he was a wonderfully engaging guy. And he had just a tremendous range. I don't know if he ever wrote the great play, but he had tremendous range. And, he wrote The Ritz, which I happened to see with Sadie years ago. And it was just an hysterically funny play. At the same time, he wrote a lot of very serious stuff. Very much different. So anyway, he will be missed. The other person that I'll mention here at this point is that Richard Reeves, who we all remember perhaps a little more vaguely. He was a columnist. He was a political commentator. But he would, at a time that people like that would get on the Johnny Carson show, the Tonight Show, believe it or not, and talk about politics and the books he wrote. And he had a lot of interesting views. I won't go into all of them here. He was a Democrat, but he actually was pretty even-handed in the way he looked at presidents. And he had harsh things to say about everybody, honestly. He had, believe it or not, he liked Obama. And he also liked Ronald Reagan, which is a tough combination, you might think. Interesting, his views on Nixon and Kennedy. He said he voted for Nixon. But he came to believe that, in fact, Nixon, because he didn't trust anyone, brought out the worst in people, and Kennedy was just the opposite. That because he was more optimistic, he brought out the best in people. But he also wrote a book really castigating the government officials involved in the Japanese internment, which we talked about last week in connection with Nakashima, and named names, including Earl Warren, who became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So, very interesting guy, Richard Reeves, passing away. Yes, you were going to tell us about beans, I think, Tamsen.
Suddenly.
Yes, suddenly.
The lowly bean is a coveted pantry item.
Right.
So this is funny. This really resonates with me because more than 2 weeks ago, when I was in my last group exercise class. I was in a Pilates class,
right.
And I walked in, and people were going crazy, and they're saying, "Oh, they're starting to close schools down, this, that, and the other thing." And one of the ladies said, "You know what? The stores are sold out of black beans, cans of black beans."
Right. You would think they normally give those away.
And I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
And it turns out this is the bean moment. Now, we've been seeing a bunch of recipes for beans, especially in the New York Times. And Mark Bittman has been writing articles proudly proclaiming that beans are a much better source of protein than the meat and even the fish that we eat, okay? But here there was an article in the business section saying the bean business is kind of exploding. And there was the story of a man in the bean business, a guy who runs a trade group, goes into a grocery store and sees empty bean shelves, and he's amazed. This has not happened. We've been through all kinds of disasters. Never are the shelves are often empty of milk and toilet paper, but not of beans. And really, it's hard to find a bean around here. And it's a wonderful story in the business section. The bean people are, sad that it's taking, a terrible event like this to kind of beef up their business, but they are really enjoying it. One group kind of started a bean club. Like there's a wine club, and every 3 months get a different wine delivered. So they started a bean club. It's kind of a joke that you get different beans every few months.
Yeah.
They now have an 8,000 person waiting list to be on Bean of the Month Club. So it's
sounds like
kind
a birthday
of
gift. Yeah.
Amazing. And I have seen a lot of great bean recipes I'm anxious to make. I mean, I've been a lover of beans, but they've been trying, some people seem to be having these beans on their shelves with no intention of eating them.
Yeah, that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Gives you a sense of control.
Yeah, and they interview one 18-year-old who says, I don't think I've ever had them. Hard pass.
Yeah.
That young lady is
well, is
not
the recipe
looking forward to it.
a bean recipe or not?
No, it's not. There was in the New York Times Magazine, which I assume the recipes in there have been put together, eons ago. Right. But it's another funny sort of personal story because yesterday you and I were in the Giant food store. And we're getting some things that we needed, okay? But I was just noticing the shelves, and I noticed there was no flour at all, okay? No white flour, no whole wheat flour, no flour, except buckwheat flour. Mm-hmm. And I was really tempted to buy some buckwheat flour because my mother used to make these great buckwheat pancakes. And I was thinking about that, but I was reluctant to just randomly stock up on things that I didn't really have a plan for. And we don't really need that many more carbs in our life at the moment. So I opened the New York Times, and of course, Gabrielle Hamilton has a recipe for buckwheat crepes. Well, dang!
I think we can. Dang! I think the buckwheat flour is still there.
Possibly, yes. Anyway, she has a recipe for a galette. Galette, you had galettes when we were in Brittany and Normandy. It's a
cheese.
Yeah, usually a savory filling to a heartier crepe, which buckwheat would qualify as hearty. And so she has kind of a delicious crepe with eggs, Gruyere, and a little bit of cheese. Not a little bit of ham. Okay. Is what I meant to say. So that would be tasty. Buckwheat Galettes by Gabrielle Hamilton in the New York Times. That'd be fun to do. It's we're spending a little more time cooking, so you can fuss around with interesting, doable.
Okay, so there's a couple more quick obituaries. I don't want to. These are just interesting stories. I mean, this Boris Stankovic lived to be 94, so it's not as if his life was cut short at an early stage. But what's interesting about Boris Stankovic, who happened to be from what was once known as Yugoslavia, and he was a sports official, is that in telling the story of Boris Stankovic's life, we learn that our understanding, certainly my understanding, with respect to how we have come to have professional basketball players in the Olympics, which was a huge change when it happened, and it was marked by the so-called Dream Team, including Michael Jordan. And we always assumed that was because the NBA said, this is silly, the U.S. should never lose the basketball gold medal. We have guys here who are 10 times better than any other country, and in fact, they were, and they still are. But why is it that, we figured that the pros were strong-armed into the Olympics by the NBA and by the U.S.? And the answer is, they weren't. The answer is that Boris Stankovic led a European movement to include professional players in the Olympics, and the reason was because the European players were striving to participate in the NBA themselves as the game became more international and the league became more international. And these countries wanted to make sure that, notwithstanding that they would participate in the NBA, they could come back home and play on their Olympic teams. They did not have deep rosters. Uh-huh. So the European countries needed to have the Olympics allow professional basketball players. So that's exactly what happened. You saw, for that reason, the Dream Team, and you saw bolstered, more highly skilled European teams, and raised the level of everybody across the board, although, of course, most for the Americans. So I thought that was interesting and put sort of a theory that I think everybody had to rest. Richard Marek passed away. Richard Marek was an editor, but what's interesting about Richard Marek, who edited Baldwin, James Baldwin, Robert Ludlum, Ernest Hemingway, Thomas Harris, who wrote The Silence of the Lambs, is the obituary starts with a story about one of his first jobs in the 60s when he worked for Scribner's. He was entrusted with a manuscript of A Movable Feast, which is the Ernest Hemingway book, and it was a draft with a lot of notes handwritten by Hemingway, the only copy of that. He was taking it home and he was going to deliver it somewhere else the next day. And he took the subway home and he got home and he realized he didn't have the manuscript anymore. And he had just left it on the subway.
Oh my God.
And he spent the whole night in tears. He said, my career is over, or worse. And he goes the next morning to the subway lost and found, and someone had turned it in.
Oh my God. What a lucky guy.
So for that reason, he had a career, and he had a great career in publishing. And what's funny, too, is that he married a woman named Dabnah Hine in 1991. His first wife had passed away. And interestingly, he didn't write many of his own books, but he did write a novel with Miss Hine in 2019 that explored the question, according to the Times, of whether great transcendent love affairs can still occur in the age of online dating. And he and Miss Hine concluded that they can. So theirs being that kind of love affair. So in any event, that was Richard Marek.
All right, now can I talk about Holbein?
Holbein. We've been waiting for Holbein. We're waiting an awfully long time.
All right, so fun to see a page in the Wall Street Journal with a big image of Hans Holbein's The Younger's Ambassadors, which is a painting that I'm talking about in my online lecture this week to my classes. Painted in 1533, and it was Holbein's kind of entree into the English portrait market. Holbein was Swiss, but largely because of the Reformation. That religious imagery was outlawed by many Protestant sects. Mm-hmm. So, it was a tough time for artists. And he ends up over in England with the idea that there may be more opportunity there for a painter. He paints this magnificent double portrait of two young French envoys from basically the French king on behalf of the Pope. It's a long story.
But that's the painting we're looking at.
And
here.
It's luscious. Yeah. I mean, it's just, beautiful depiction of the men, all these kind of different objects, instruments, oriental rugs, brocade tapestry, tile floors, etc. It's really a showpiece meant to say, look what I can do. And it works. He becomes a key painter for Henry VIII and ends up painting all the people, many of the people, I should say, that we read about in Wolf Hall, by Hilary Mantel. And this is an article in the Wall Street Journal that actually says, Hilary Mantel was quite inspired by Holbein's paintings, and she would look at his depictions of the characters, including Thomas Cromwell, and look at them for insights into their personality, their character, etc. She loves Holbein. In fact, she had a print of the ambassadors in her own home. She and her husband, who was a geologist, and they lived all over Botswana, Saudi Arabia, dragged this picture everywhere with them. It's kind of a, sort of a touchstone in their lives. And so that was interesting to see how this painting has so much inspired her work of thousands of pages. So I'll probably have to factor that.
Well, I
idea.
also think we also agree that Hilary Mantel has the all-time PR agent because there have been so many stories about her third volume in the trilogy about Thomas Cromwell from so many angles, and now about the painting angle. It's just unbelievable.
Yes, and I think she also has an excellent makeup artist and photographer. Well, there's a fabulous picture of her here, and she's actually older than we are. So,
yeah, well,
I mean, maybe it's an old picture. I don't know. But
I don't know.
She looks terrific.
Maybe she works out. All right, the last two obituaries, and I'm done with obituaries. Eric Weisberg, a banjo player, is famous because he played the banjo in the actual audio recording of Dueling Banjos. So what is Dueling Banjos? In Deliverance, the movie, there is a scene which everyone who's seen the movie remembers well, and even people who haven't seen the movie or may be aware of, whereas this child who is an adolescent who looks like he's somewhat short of something, and he's supposed to represent something in the way of an inbred child, seems to be incapable of speech, but at a certain point he just picks up the banjo and starts parroting what someone in the group that's visiting to go on their little canoe trip is doing on his guitar.
Can I just say
yeah.
that Deliverance was a scary movie?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I was on a canoe trip in the summer when it came out. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, and it's a theme we all know.
Well, let's just go back to the music for the moment. Yeah. I mean, you had that kind of banjo picking in Bonnie and Clyde. Well, yes, I'm not talking about that right now. I'm talking about in Bonnie and Clyde and Beverly Hillbillies. That was done by Flatt and Scruggs. But Dueling Banjos, as you were about to just started to sing it, was the theme in Deliverance, and it was much more popular than anything else. It was number 2 on the pop chart. It was a huge selling thing. Yeah. This guy played the banjo. What's interesting about this guy, Eric Weisberg, is he's born in Brooklyn. And you say to yourself, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, the guy has such an amazing career. He ends up playing the banjo or guitar on, I'll just mention, with Judy Collins, John Denver, Billy Joel, Bob Dylan, Art Garfunkel, Tom Paxton, just about everybody. It's the most amazing career. Say, how did this happen? And what's funny about the obit is that it turns out that he grew up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He attended a progressive school where he began taking violin lessons, but he spent summers at Camp Woodland in Phoenicia, New York, near Woodstock, which was run by the father and uncle of a young girl at that time named Toshi Aline Ota, who was the future wife of Pete Seeger. So he got to meet Pete Seeger, who gave him banjo lessons when he was 8 and 9. And so, long, strange trip. And Eli Miller passed away, the so-called Sultan of Seltzer, who kept, according to the Times, Brooklyn bubbling. He had his own seltzer delivery. You hear about these guys once in a while,
right,
who carry these cartons of seltzer, wooden crates, if you will, filled with seltzer, heavy
with
on their shoulders.
Bottles,
right.
Yeah.
And he carries them up 10, 12 flights of stairs. This is one of those guys. And Miller, when he was interviewed earlier, and some article was written about him in the Times in 2013, explains the appeal of seltzer in a lot of ways. One of it is, and this I didn't know, when you go to the supermarket and you buy seltzer or soda water or whatever, it has 5 pounds of pressure, okay, in those plastic bottles. When you get seltzer, it's 60 to 80 pounds per square inch of pressure. It's much more highly pressurized, and that's why it's a different product and it's a different experience. Now, he's selling the seltzer, but seltzer is different. And, of course, it's also the romanticism of it is that these guys who did these deliveries with this, walking upstairs, 6, 8 flights, whatever it is, until they were old age. This guy passed away at 86, stopped delivering only in 2017. So he was 83, 84 when he stopped delivering. He said he was wearing him down, the 70-pound cases of seltzer, although he did say, the truth is, his dream was to, when he dies, he wants to die while he's doing a delivery. Well, it turns out, this is how his father died. His father was in the same business named Meyer Miller, and he retired at a certain point, but would still help his son out. But in 1976, he was doing a delivery, and he died of a heart attack. That's the way seltzer guys go, apparently. But Eli Miller died in bed, I suppose, at the age of 86, 2 years after he retired.
All right, so...
You had an article on sleep.
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
As a matter of fact, I have to say that it's a little bit tricky getting a good night's sleep when we're just stuck.
Yes.
At home.
Because we're less active. We're less active, okay. And our mind is wandering.
So with that in mind, the Wall Street Journal did a whole, issue, like a whole section on sleep.
Right.
Okay, with all kinds of articles. And I'm just going to mention a few of them. One is titled, "Is Sleeping Naked a Glorious Return to Nature?" And it's a discussion pro and con sleeping naked. And of course, their expert that they refer to in sleeping naked is Noah Grosshandler, a 24-year-old technology product manager.
That's not his real name. You think that's his real name?
Yes. Yeah. Why else would you include the advice of a 24-year-old about whether one should sleep naked? Yeah. And so it's not actually a very helpful article.
No, none of the articles
it just
very
says
helpful, honestly.
You're warmer if you, wear pajamas, and there's the possibility that it's not quite as clean to sleep in the nude, for obvious reasons.
Right.
So there's that, but we have the advice of Noah Grosshandler. If you're interested, go to the Wall Street Journal for that. Then there was a fun article about about wearing nightshirts. And that kind of resonates because we've been watching Schitt's Creek,
right?
Where Eugene Levy's character wears a nightshirt,
right.
And everybody gives him a lot of grief,
right.
But he claims
keeps wearing it.
It's the newest, latest, greatest thing,
right?
And of course, nightshirts go way back, and apparently, nightshirts are a lot warmer to wear than anything else. They regulate your body heat better, and were much more popular before we had all this central heating. And so that they also harken back to a time when, very much in the West, modern world, we had this idea that men wear pants, women wear dresses. Okay, that's kind of a new an arbitrary limitation. I mean, throughout history.
Well, because the nightshirt is like a dress.
Yeah, but I mean, men have worn skirts and dresses throughout history.
Right.
And, all kinds of tunics, and still do in many other parts of the world. Yeah. So nightshirts kind of went out of fashion. But this article kind of, does recommend highly the functionality of them. And recommends them, and also points out that the top of a nightshirt is really quite presentable in the world of telecommuting. Okay, nobody can tell.
Yeah, that it's a nightshirt. I think it's a shirt.
Yeah, it has a collar. It looks like any normal shirt, and once again, you don't need to wear pants.
That's
okay.
Great.
And we're all excited. That is the greatest part.
Well, the
greatest thing about remote.
I'm just going to say Noah Grosshandler would take that route. There's no question about it.
Let's see. And so the Wall Street Journal also has a great article about how what you eat can enhance, or in some cases hinder, your sleep. And it starts out with this remark: "A good night's sleep is the new kale," Chef David Bouley said recently. "Everybody wants it, and it's good for your health." Okay, and he actually has a series at his restaurant of kind of meals that are sleep enhancing, and incorporate various ingredients that will help you sleep. Now, we know certain things are not helpful to sleeping, and that would be coffee, right?
Yeah,
caffeine
right.
Of any kind, and actually also wine. Okay, alcohol really can interrupt your what does it interrupt? Your deep sleep or something like that.
Something interrupts your REM sleep, something interrupts your other deep sleep.
Right. The caffeine does one kind of sleep, and the alcohol does another. And so the doctor here, he says, I'm not suggesting that everybody become a day drinker, but, why not have your wine at lunch instead of dinner? Yeah. It will metabolize by bedtime if you indulge midday, because your body is busy metabolizing the alcohol for quite a while after you drink it, and that kind of wakes you back up.
That's a big behavior change. There's no coffee after the morning, no wine after lunch. That's a big change. I mean, people don't live that way. Right?
But here, let me tell you what you should eat if you want a good night's sleep. Okay? And each of these foods has a different reason, but I'm not going to go through all of them. Okay? So, fish, such as salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
You don't need any encouragement to eat all those things. Sardines will cure everything. I'm just convinced. All right? Kiwi, tart cherries, oatmeal, walnuts. We know about turkey, right? The tryptophan. Everybody's always dozing off after Thanksgiving dinner. But miso, okay? Bananas, chicken, eggs, almonds, milk, coconut oil. All right? And oysters, clams, walnuts, leafy greens, mushrooms. All right, so you can eat your way to a great sleep. And finally, the one thing that gets
Go ahead.
in the way of sleep, caffeine, well, I know. You're saying that we're running out of time.
No, I'm not saying we're running out of time. I think we said it already. I mean, Michael Pollan says that you can have a cup of coffee in the morning, but...
Well, he's got a whole audiobook.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear an audiobook about the effects of caffeine on your life...
I heard it, you were listening to him on NPR the other day. I'm not... It's a lot to say about caffeine. Let me put it to you that way.
Right.
It's a lot of detail.
Well, he's kind of a downer.
I don't know if he's a downer or not. He's got a lot, he's into it. He's into it deeply. But I do think it requires real change in the way people live. If you're going to say you can only have caffeine in the morning. He says caffeine and green tea, and he kind of green tea in the middle of the day and then nothing afterwards, right? So.
Right.
That's
tough. And then you can have chamomile.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Okay.
Daniel, lots of things worth doing are hard to do.
All right. But,
okay.
That's a big change.
I'm not advocating it. Yeah. I enjoy my coffee.
Yeah. But, all right. So
you should just know what it's doing to you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, he's made a study of it. There's no question about it. Last thing. Striking article about murder mystery weekend at, guess where, the Mohonk Mountain House. That's right, Mohonk Mountain House, which we talked about before, which is a wonderful setting, wonderful natural setting. And we've gone there for jazz weekend. So they do theme weekends. And just recently they had a Mohonk Mountain House mystery weekend written about by Alexis Solosky. And her mother had signed up for it and persuaded Alexis to go with her. And apparently what it is, and we've seen this and they advertise it, but I never really thought too terribly much about it. They have a group called Murder Cafe from New York who has performers that come, and they put on basically the outlines of a situation, if you will, or a show which culminates, and it's in a funny way, sort of a sketchy way. And one of the cast members gets so-called murdered. And the question...
Yeah, it's just like Murder Mystery Dinner Theater. But it's a weekend instead of just a night.
Right.
And you know how this started? I thought that was an interesting thing. It started with Stephen King. And buddies.
Yeah.
A bunch of famous guys.
Right.
And they do the first one, kind of on a lark years ago. We've actually seen Stephen King at the Mohonk Mountain House because that was part of the inspiration for the way he set, what's that movie called?
The Shining.
The Shining.
But it was Stephen King, Edward Gorey, and Donald Westlake.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Going to a weekend with them running an event.
But it also used to be more serious. So
it was more serious. Now it's kind of camp because...
that's exactly right. It's camp.
Yeah.
That's the right word. But this, Alexis Solowski says she's having a wonderful time. They were hysterically funny. They set up the situation. And then what they did was they broke the audience, the participants, if you will, into teams. And teams of 4, 6, or 8 people, if you will. And she says her teammates included teachers, lawyers, and oncologists, and a man who was his wife told me in textiles, whatever that means. And then each of the teams would get together and put forward their own solution in their own performance after they spent some time together.
Skit.
And depending on the accuracy of their solution and the quality of their performance, here's what really got me. There would be a winner chosen, and the winner got a free weekend at Mohonk, which is no small thing.
Well, it would have to be, Daniel. This sounds horrific to me.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It's
fantastic.
Just like...
You're fighting it.
Sounds
We're
like
going
one of those
next year.
team-building things where you get put in a group and then you have to come up with a skit.
Article.
And you have the diva in the group. And you have the naysayer.
You're drawing me in, Tamsen.
I really go to Mohonk to get away from it all. I can't even imagine.
She says the guy in textile killed in the skit. He was fantastic. Her mother delivered the epilogue. They thought they did great, but they didn't win. Somebody else won, which was fine. And later the Mohonk texted them the footage. A flurry of Facebook friend requests followed. And that afternoon, my mother descended to the reception desk and signed herself up for next year. So we could do this next year. We could meet Alexis Solowski and her mother. We could even be on their team. And win a free weekend at Mohonk.
You find yourself a partner and go. You're welcome to it.
Look, as she says, and if you go back to art, we're talking about these arts organizations who are really struggling now, is this. How little theater needs, Solowski says, a stage, willing humans, as art and supportable, as a minimally competent communal effort, tremendous. Next year, honey.
On that note...
On that note, this is Tamsen. Dan, read the paper. This is Dan Abuhoff, and you're probably still...
Tamsen Granger.
And we'll see you next week.